Welcome to I Could Never, a podcast about non-monogamy and the many ways it can look. I'm Genevieve from Chill Polyamory on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and I'm joined as always by my co-host and partner, Ishik.
Yes, I'm Ishik. I'm here, and I am a grown adult man who definitely didn't burn his hand on a stove earlier.
Well, sometimes we got to learn that lesson again.
You know, it only takes 35 years. Well, I am, that aside, excited to share that today we have joining us Ashtin Berry, aka the Collectress. She is a writer, sommelier, hospitality consultant, and activist focusing on intersectionality and inclusivity in the spaces where we gather. Ashtin, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm super excited. But before that, we have to go to a thing that doesn't burn us when we touch it. Our favorite segment, Viber Vent.
It's Viber Vent time. For anyone listening for the first time, we always like to start off the show with a little icebreaker called Vibe or Vent, where we'll each take a beat to share about something that's either really making us happy recently or something that sucks that we need to get off our chest. So, Ishik, would you like to start us out?
Yes. I am going to vent today, and it has nothing to do with being burned. Except by our socio-political media landscape.
Okay. Let's jump into it.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we
You're
do
not
here.
wrong.
That's what we do here. So, a little bit of context, timing-wise, we're like a week or so off, a little less actually, a few days past the arrest of Luigi Mangione. For anyone who somehow doesn't know, allegedly this man shot a healthcare CEO. And the response from the media and from the government was insane, right? There was just like massive manhunt nationwide to like try to find this guy. And it was just so fucking appalling because I was looking at the stats earlier at some point. There's like at least 60 gun murders a day in the United States. Mm. Where's the nationwide manhunt for them? You know, where's the massive media coverage for them? And so like these huge machines like kick into action when a rich or powerful person dies or is harmed. Just so much money and energy and time and attention being devoted to them, but for the masses, nothing. It's still sitting with me. It's still really disgusting. I've been wanting to share about it for days. And, you know, this is where I get to vent. So I'm venting about that. It sucks.
Yeah, and having it just reinforced so plainly of like who is important in this current structure. Yeah, it's like such a reminder in a way that's pretty sobering.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to what you were saying because I had a lot of people DM me to be like, you know, how could you be in defense of murder? And I encourage you to go look up the history of how health insurance companies even came about. Mm. You want to talk about ghoulish? You want to talk about something that is frightening? And that's someone who is a Black American and is you know, descended from slaves. And I know people are like, oh, when people bring this up, but how would I be here if no one ever revolted? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. How would I be here if no one ever killed their master? Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And I also think that in real time, I think it's going to be really interesting for white people in America with the coming in of this presidency, watch someone who is from a group that has been newly inducted into whiteness be de-whiteified in real time. Mm-hmm. Even when they started the manhunt, they called him a light-skinned man.
Yeah, I remember that shit in the press conference.
And I said to people, I said, that is a nod to tell you that he is not white.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first indicator that they wanted you to associate this man as not white. So I think, you know, not take over your Vim, but I think that it's going to be really interesting. And I think just go look at why we have health insurance companies.
Yeah, if you want to have a bad time.
And educate yourself.
And educate yourself. Go down that rabbit hole. Woof.
Well, now that let's wrap up this event. I'll throw it to you, Ashtin. Are you vibing or are you venting today?
Am I vibing or venting? I don't know if it's a vibe or a vent, but I've been thinking a lot this week about this idea of convenience and ease. I did a story the other day that people have been like, oh my gosh, could you talk more about this, about the connection between pity and charity? And why pity is not a sustainable, activating emotion. But also why how charity is about convenience, how pity is also an emotion of convenience. Oof, I feel sorry for you, right? Because I don't have to go deeper,
Mm. Hmm.
right? But I get to feel good about myself because at least I acknowledge that I knew you were mistreated. But I can move on, right? Because that's convenient for me to say I see it and move on, right? Not to see it and ask questions or to try and comfort. So I've just been thinking a lot about that and how so many people claim they want community, but commit themselves to emotions that are risk averse, emotions that are very shallow.
Yeah. Pity is distancing. It's not empathy.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
You touched on so many things that I have explicit questions written about. I'm so
We
excited to
can
dive
loop
into
back
that
in.
shit. So we're gonna get back to that later. But for now,
Okay.
thank you, thank
Yeah.
you, Genevieve.
Um,
Wrap us up.
yeah, okay. Well, I wasn't sure if I should vibe or vent. So we're recording this prior to Christmas. And a lot of listeners might know, like about a year and a half ago, I went no contact with the rest of my family of origin. And so I'm sort of like vibing in a sense of creating new tradition from nothing. On the other end, there's also like this dark underside of it, of just like grief and pain, but also Christmas often felt hollow growing up for me just because I was like, well, the rest of the year, though, you're like neglectful or abusive. In the month of December, for a video essay, I'm going to be talking about, Hallmark Christmas movies, but it's hard sometimes because the premise of a lot of these Christmas movies is that people like it's expected people just want to go back to a small town and tradition, and that it's expected that everybody involved has like nostalgia for when they were a child in Christmas. And I'm like, I don't want to go back to being a kid. Like,
Well, that's the mythology. It'll all work out with Christmas magic. It'll all work
uh-huh.
out.
And I, like I said, love looking ahead at all of the people around that I'm like, I genuinely do enjoy your company. And this actually is a really warm, loving Christmas this time because we made it ourselves
Yeah.
in adulthood. So, like, that's nice.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, I mean,
we do want to
I'm
get
feeling
into
warmed
it.
up. You're feeling warmed. I think we're feeling a little better. I think this is a perfect time to jump into conversations about non-monogamy. So,
Yeah.
love to talk to you, Ashton. Can you tell us a little bit about what your relationships look like? Yeah, tell us about it.
Hmm. One of the things I do, whether it's for romantic or other relationships, is I'm really committed to relationship anarchy because I think we do too much um, assuming assuming that people know our desires, our needs. There's a lot of specifically in Western culture, period, there's a lot of like implied you should know these things and what I need. But again, those are based off of not that individual. It's based off of larger societal norms. And so what I like about relationship anarchy is it asks us to come back to the individual person and to be explicit in this way that like is really caring, because a lot of people have never been asked, what do you need outside of crisis?
Mm. So, what initially drew you to relationship anarchy?
Um, After getting out of a relationship and being pissed, and I was like, ah, there's got to be something different out there. I'm so sick of this shit. Um,
Wait, really quick. What was the relationship and why was it
Why were you
why were you so
pissed?
pissed?
I was pissed because it was once again a man say they wanted me when they actually wanted was domination.
Mm.
They wanted to conquer. And I was like, it's just so, first of all, it's just so boring. Like, get a new thing, you know? It's just so boring. But also, it's also frustrating to hear men say that they want non-traditional women, and then once they get you, try to do all of the labor to be like, okay, now do the traditional thing.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's almost like a bait and switch.
Yeah, I hate it. I hate it so much. That's why I was pissed, right?
Mm.
That's kind of how like I stumbled into relationship anarchy. And then like I don't know that I've ever explicitly stated that I adhere to non-monogamy, but that I'm like less concerned about how I define it, more concerned about how I relate to people, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So, just getting a bit more into relationship anarchy for you, can you tell us about how it works for you and maybe a bit about why it works for you?
I think relationship anarchy is just about taking out the hierarchy of relationships. You cannot take out the power dynamics because those are set up by society, but you can mitigate how societal power dynamics influence your relationship by explicitly calling attention to them and negotiating about how you relate to one another. Changing, being authentic about what you need and what you want, not what people expect or think you should want and need. And then, like, I think redefining what success for a relationship, because everything we're told is that if the relationship isn't this way, then it didn't succeed. And I think I would also say to the biggest thing that I've learned is to look at failure as an invitation.
Mm.
And if time spent with people was well loved, there was no failure.
Yeah, not defining the parting of a relationship or the distancing of a connection as a failure, but just was the time.
Or the change in a relationship. You know what I mean?
Well,
Yeah.
I would also be love to hear kind of in a little bit more specificity to the degree that you're comfortable sharing, like relationships where you have a lot of closeness, intimacy, maybe sex, maybe not. Can you give a sense of what some of those relationships kind of look like currently for you?
Yeah, I think they look different because many of the people I'm engaged in relationship with don't actually live in the same city as me, which wasn't intentional, but I prefer it, right? So in the past, I used to live between here, New Orleans and New York. So I had two places, and so I would split my month, kind of 2 weeks, 2 weeks, sometimes month. I was dating someone in New York, but they traveled for work, and so we had to, even with me kind of like having a place in New York and being there. I think that was one of the first relationships where I was like, we have to talk about pacing and time because it can't be an assumption that when you're in New York, my time is automatically always yours just because you travel. And it can't be this assumption that like my time in New York should revolve solely around you. You should be one of the things that in the solar system, but you should not be um soul things. So, I mean, I think for me, it looks like having explicit agreements about when we do see each other and the frequency with which we see each other. I mean, I actually send forms. So when I'm saying like explicit discussions, I'm not saying like, oh, hey, like, how do you fit? Like, no, I'm sending you these questions. I want you to answer them and think about them, and I want you to send them back to me, so that we can engage in an explicit discussion about these things, not a haphazard off the top of our brain, right? I want you to be intentional about the way that you're coming to this discussion. I want to be intentional about the way that I'm coming to this discussion. Does that answer it well?
Very
Yeah,
much.
that's I love that. Talking about this form, I'm super interested to hear about this form.
Yeah, the
That's
kinds of
like, oh, a
questions.
form, you say, a questionnaire.
I like
What
forms.
kinds of things are on it?
It started actually as a friend form that I made with a girlfriend of mine because we have not lived in the same on the same continent for about almost a decade now. And we were just finding it really difficult to stay in touch. And so I made a form that was constructed of about 5 to 7 questions, I think, when it began. And it was like, is it that you don't have time or does making time feel stressful? Why does making time feel stressful? Is it about what we talk about? Is it about the way we catch up? Or maybe it has nothing to do with me. Is it about blah, blah? So it started off kind of like that with me and her. And she was like, oh, those questions were really helpful because it made me realize like it was overwhelming to try to catch up on everything we missed. Right. I think some people can relate to having catch up friends. And that's a very exhausting relationship, right? Because it's a reality distortion. What's happening is that like you're trying to catch up on such an expansive amount of time that's passed in such a short period that you're not actually engaged in any type of intimate transmit emotional transmission. You're just logging lost time. So you don't leave the conversation feeling fulfilled. You leave the conversation feeling I still didn't get what I needed. And over time, that becomes more and more frustrating. So that's not about forms, but that's kind of how I got there. And then I was dating someone and they we had very different communication styles, which people don't really talk about in relationship, how you can both be talking and you can't hear each other, and it's not because anybody's a poor listener or a poor communicator. You just simply communicate very differently. And that the form that I use with romantic partners kind of came from engaging with him and us having issues of not being able to actually get to what we were trying to say to one another. It kind of built out from there. And I want to be clear with everybody. It's not like after every date I'm sending a form or after everything like that. It's more so like at pivotal moments of when I see there's a shift in the relationship. If I go on a first date and I think, wow, this is someone I could build something with, I want to send the form because I'm already changing the way that I'm thinking about relating to them, right? It's not for every single person. If I don't really see us having anything, I'm not sending you a form, right? The form is kind of like a tell of investment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's lovely. I think a lot of people wind up getting to that place in check-ins, even though it might not be written down for most people. It's sort of streamlining it, you know?
Yeah.
That's lovely. Yeah.
I can imagine when the premise of bringing somebody a form, especially after like a first date, right? That I can imagine people who would absolutely love that and eat that shit up, and that's like their jam. And I can imagine people who would have a very bad reaction to that, right? And so, yeah, so I would love to hear what the typical reaction you get from people is.
So I think it's all about the level set, is what I've learned. Is you can't just spring it on people and be like, hey, I want you to fill this out, right? Because then people won't do it. I think you gotta like really explain to people the type of person you are and like the type of relationship you want to have. Um, and I think that that really kind of preps people, right? So that they don't feel like no one wants to feel like they're taking a test, right? So when I first started this, I got really bad reactions, especially because at the time I was dating two older men. One of them literally called me and was like, "Why the fuck you sending me a test?" And, and I was like, "It's not a test. Like, there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not testing you. I want to understand these things." He was like, "No." He just flat out said, "No, I'm not doing it." Um, Once he got to know me like better, he was like, I think most people are untrusting. So it's hard for them to believe that you're not doing this for some other ulterior motive. And I think specifically because I have a Instagram that people sometimes fear that they're going to be used for content. And so I always have to, that's why I think the level set is really important to explain that like this isn't for any type of performance. I'm not going to use this for content. This isn't so that I can like show your page to, you know what I mean? Like it's really about us. But also what I like is I like the documentation of being able to go back in different passages of the relationship to be able to review growth. I know some people would think like, oh, does that take out the mystery or the fun of it? No, I think it actually adds to it, right? I think people who are uninterested in trying to make their relationship look like a performance, but actually be present in it, enjoy the fact that they are being engaged in a way that allows them to be fully heard, if that makes sense.
It's really thoughtful. Like every part of it is thoughtful. Shifting gears a little bit, we often like to ask guests what's something that they wish they learned earlier in exploring, non-traditional relationships. Is there something that comes to mind for you or something that you would want to tell people who are just starting out?
I think a few things that I wish that I learned earlier is that you've got to pace yourself into new practices. Even if you switched within your mind or intellectually, doesn't mean the body has shifted from patterns that you remember. And so, remember to be kind to yourself, but remember to be kind to the other people who are also trying.
Yeah.
Right?
Is there a specific experience that you can recall where that happened, where you had like started to change maybe your ideas about something, but your body hadn't quite caught up yet?
Yeah. having sex with more than one person,
Mm.
ongoing. You know what I mean? Like I was like, in my mind, I could say all the reasons why I was engaging ethically and everything like that, but my body was uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And I had to like take a moment, pause, and stop to figure out what that was about because there's no point in engaging in sex and then feel guilty afterwards.
Something that people will ask me is like, well, if you have discomfort, why are you doing it? Do you ever get that question, or is that ever a question that you've asked yourself?
I definitely asked myself that question. And I think like for me, I think it's one thing to have discomfort. I think it's another thing to have guilt. I think for me it's asking where's the discomfort coming from, right? But yeah, I mean, one of the people I was dating was like, I'm don't have an issue, so like why are you so hung up on it? Why do you feel so bad about it? And I had to kind of like unpack a lot of things that I didn't realize I was holding on to, which are like societal teachings about kind of like you're supposed to treat your body like this and da 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 and things like that. So I had to unpack that, but like yeah, and then afterwards it was about getting past the discomfort, right? But also like pausing to like stop guilt in its traps and be like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah. And with your partner saying like, why are you feeling like this? Is that a moment when you were hoping for some more kindness at yourself in the process of
I mean,
change?
he was like very he was like kind like I'm sure Annie like he was kind like he was like very much like like what tell me like what you're thinking like what do you think I have like I'm making opinions about you, do you think I have like that like he was, but I think he was more kind of trying to get me to be more honest because I think he felt as if I was giving him superficial answers.
So he was sincerely like exploring that with you, not saying that out of frustration.
No, he wasn't saying it out of frustration. He was genuinely trying to figure out what is it that is catching you up.
Looking back now, you're saying that your perspective was that he thought you were giving kind of superficial answers. Do you feel like you were giving superficial answers at first, or
I think I didn't know enough about what I was feeling to give him a deeper answer. But I think his continued questioning made me dig deeper than just giving like well, I just feel bad. I feel, you know what I mean? Like him pushing to be like, okay, but why?
it's not just I feel bad. It's like, well, but what specifically feels bad, right?
Yeah, and I think sometimes like when you are in a emotion, it can be more difficult to actually review all of it because you're still actually in the emotion. So you can't really describe it because you're still in the process of feeling it. And but his questioning made me kind of eventually realize that I didn't feel bad. What I felt was guilty. And then I had to ask myself, why do I feel guilty?
Yeah, pulling at that thread. I think that's such a good distinction of like understanding where it's coming from, and then do you like your own answer of why you would either push forward or say that's not something I want to do and I'm leaving?
I had to pause because if your body is fighting you on something, then you've got to pause. Regardless of what you know in your head, if your body is locking up after, like, even if you're incapable of having sex or whatever it may be, and then afterwards your body is locking up and having a visceral reaction, that means your body hasn't caught up to your mind. Relationships are an embodied practice.
Mm.
And so, which a lot of people don't think of it like that. And so I had to tell both of them, like, hey, I need a pause for a minute just because. And it wasn't like I was like, oh, I need months away or da da da. But I was like, I just actually need maybe a couple of weeks of not seeing either of you to kind of just figure out what's going on with me and my body. And want to be clear, it's not like I've never had sex with more than one person before, but it was that I was doing more than just having sex. I was engaged in romantic relationship with more than one person. And so my body was like, you're 27, 28, I don't know, shifting to this new thing. And we've been doing something different for 28 years. And my body hadn't quite understood what that meant.
Is there a way that the people in your life were supporting you during that time that really helped?
No, people were like, what the hell are you doing?
Really? Oh.
That sucks.
People were like, well, if it doesn't feel good, why do you continue to do this? A lot of people were thought it was like my relationship anarchy was like a phase. It's still like the way I approach my relationship is still really difficult to talk about with specifically heterosexual women committed to monogamy. But that doesn't surprise me because like so much of what I focus on in relationships is far away from like people who want marriage and children. So like that doesn't. But I feel like now most of my friends, especially since many of them have been divorced, that's not shade, that's just the truth. I think they now feel differently. And I now we have much more open conversations about it. My queer friends, I feel like have always been very supportive.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that once the fairy tale is sort of like brought down to a bit more of a grounded place, I don't know, you know?
Well, yeah, like I feel like my friends who have been through divorces and my friends who, unfortunately, for some of them, due to their circumstances, have become single parents. Now I don't really think that my me wanting to engage in relationship anarchy is wild. And it sucks that it takes like honestly traumatic experiences because divorce is traumatic. So does becoming a single parent if that wasn't your plan, right? Both of those things are traumatic. It sucks that it takes that for people to maybe consider there are other ways to be in relationship.
Hey everybody, we absolutely hope you've been enjoying season 2 of I Could Never, and we are super excited to keep bringing you more great episodes of the show, which is why we will be doing an extra special mid-season Q&A episode this coming week. So if you've had a question that you have just been burning to ask us, now is your chance. Send us an email with a few sentences to icouldneverpod@gmail.com. We will be open to submissions until end of day Sunday, April 6th. Once again, that's icouldneverpod@gmail.com, and we're excited to answer your questions. Talk to you then.
So you've written posts before about compulsory monogamy. For anyone that is like a new idea, they've never heard that term before, what does that mean to you?
I would define compulsory monogamy as being committed to a relationship structure, not people.
Mm.
And I would say the same about compulsory heterosexuality. It's defaulting to a structure, not your needs or who you are.
It's going on autopilot.
Yeah. Like I am mostly heterosexual. Is that how I want to say that? I'm like, is that how I want?
heterosexual?
But I think, like for instance, I remember it was my dear friend Irene. They said to me that when we were at a bar, they were like, "Are you actually straight, or is it that you've only ever dated men and therefore you default that you are straight?" And I was like, "Well, I've only dated men," and they were like, "Yeah, but is that a conversation about your comfortability or your sexuality?"
Mm.
And then they said to me, "Is that a conversation about your performance of gender?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think the latter is what really spoke to me because, like, my mom was a sexual educator, so people have been waiting for me to come out my entire life.
Right.
So that all of my friends were gay growing up. Like, I've had so many friends start coming out to me since literally the age of 12 that everybody just was like, clearly she's going to be a lesbian, and I, and so. And I was like a feminist before the age you're supposed to be a feminist. I think some of it was that, like, let me just say that for anybody who hasn't seen me, doesn't know what I look like. I have the privilege that I don't have to identify. I can fluidly move through queer, Black, hetero, traditional spaces of all sorts, right? Unless it's the KKK. But like other than that, I can freely move through space. And so I don't have to, and that's a privilege. And that privilege afforded me for years for me to not have to be self-aware on another level. And my former dismissal of the need to investigate those things were actual barriers to me being able to have more fulfilling relationships with people who maybe I wouldn't have considered in the past.
After that conversation with your friend, did you start looking at people differently? Did you take like a woman on a date, or what happened for you after that talk?
I was still engaged. I was still going back and forth with this man at the time. So, no, I immediately did not investigate it. But what happened was that I had someone who was a friend. When I brought this conversation up, they were very adamant that they wanted to date, which kind of took me for a loop. We've been friends for like years and you've never mentioned this,
Mm.
right? And so we went on a date, and I was like, I had fun, but I was just like, I just wasn't attracted to them like that, right? But I had fun, and a different friend challenged me on for a month to just be open to all types of dates. They were like, just be open. And I was very upfront with people. Like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm dating for fun. I'm also dating to like really take myself out of this box of making an assumption about like these things. And I just want to make sure you know that and that you're okay with that. And a lot of people were like, yeah, right. And I like met cool friends. Like one of these people is like now really a really great friend.
Yeah. I think that's another benefit of trying to not get locked into a relationship as to look a certain way is that we meet in one premise on a date. It's like, that's not really the shape, but you're great. Let's not throw this out, and make great friends that way.
Right? You know, my most romantic relationships are my friendships. They're not sexual, but they are incredibly romantic.
A lot of times people get confused or they're like, how can a platonic quote unquote connection be romantic? Do you have examples of like how that looks or what romance in friendship means to you?
I tell people all the time, are we talking about romance or are we talking about sex? Are we talking about the consumer product of romance or are we talking about the emotional transmission of care?
Mm.
Right? And I think for many people can't define romance in the
Mhm.
same ways that before hooks, many people could not define love. Just like many people before Audre Lorde could not define self care. And so I think when people hear something like, my friendships are the most romantic, I think people invoke the rituals of foreplay.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say foreplay, I'm not just talking about touching each other. I'm talking about the long foreplay of flirting, of going on dates and everything. The candles, that's what people invoke in their mind when they think of romance. And my question to people is that actually romance?
And it's interesting too because like the idea of romance only being applied to a sexual partner, but then plenty of people are fine having a non-romantic sexual partner, friends with benefits, and like separating them in that situation. But why wouldn't we separate romance as like a non-sexual romance? It's the
It's
same
the
concept.
inversion.
It's the inversion of it a bit.
I have to actually thank my friend Rebecca for her calling about how Black women relationships specifically are so romantic. The way that we like care for one another and love on one another. Like, how often do Black women go out and people are like, "Are y'all celebrating something? What are y'all doing? Like, what are y'all da 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 da?" And it's like Black women being like, "It's Thursday."
I'm with my girls.
Yeah.
With
What
my
you want?
girls, right? Like, what do you mean? Like, it's Thursday. And one of my friends, and we just did it this first time this year, and it felt really good. And I hope we make it a ritual. But she was like, "I want to celebrate us. Let's start having friend anniversaries."
Aw.
And so, like, we had a friend anniversary, and I was like, and then people were like, "Are you on a date? Y'all are so cute together." And we were like, "No, we're friends. But isn't it romantic? Look how beautiful this is." Those things are romantic, and I see it all the time. Like one of the things that I love about TikTok is watching how people who are in love with their friends and not in a sexual way, but like in love with their friends, the way that they care for each other. How is that not romantic?
I know. I know. There's so many ways that a friendship can look.
So when you're building friendships with not being locked into this mindset of kind of a more traditional, more restrictive idea of how friendships can look, do you have conversations with your friends about how you want things to operate? How do those conversations go?
I think a great example is one of my relationship with like one of my longest guy friends. He makes a ton of money. when I started practicing relationship anarchy, we said it and it came to the financial part, he was like, I don't think you should ever pay when we go out. He's like, not that you don't do well, you know what I mean? But he's like, relative, I make tons of money.
He gets it.
I mean, we were literally just talking about this. You had written a thing, and
yeah, I've been talking about this recently because I actually had a friendship end because she didn't get it in that way, especially when it comes to like class, and like she made like 6 figures in this sales job and she was dating a low-income teacher, and she got him this $700 chair, for as a gift, and he took her out to dinner. And that was proportionate, in my opinion. I'm like, he did a loving thing for you, you did a loving thing for him. But every time they had an argument, she was like, you gave me $11 pasta, I gave you a $700 chair. And she was so angry at that. And I was like, I think I need to fully pull away people in my life that aren't willing to do what the guy you were just describing did, which is like actually critically name the power imbalances.
Yeah. And also I feel for her because like what a ungracious life, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like her life must be very isolating to not be able to see people try to give from what they've got and only see the number, right? I pity. I know we talked about it before, but I do.
Get 'em.
I pity people. I pity people in that position, right? And this is also why I tell people that if you date someone, make sure that they're generous. Yeah.
How do you spot generosity in the people you're getting close to?
Not tallying.
Not scorekeeping. Yeah.
Yeah. People who, I know I talked about documenting and record keeping, but documenting and record keeping in my relationships is a form of accountability for me to be able to make sure that like I'm remaining in step with the things that people said that they need. It's not to tally. You said this, I said this. You did this, I did this. People who are generous are people who know that we sometimes fall into patterns or cycles or do things that are not loving, not because we do not care for people, but because we are still working and growing as humans. But people who are generous also actually give. I think many people are transactional. They say that they're giving, but they have an expectation that they get something back, whether it's tangible or intangible. People who are generous give without expectation. And I tell people all the time, how people treat you in those first moments when you're dating someone or becoming their friend is generally so telling, right? About what they value. Right? And not just what they value just on a larger format, but what they value in you.
Getting into the chest.
I'm curious, like, so with this person that was like, he was volunteering, I should be paying. Was there additional conversation around like how to not attach strings to that? Or was that just easy to do on its own?
Yeah, like we had a conversation at first and I was kind of like, I want to talk about what this means because one, like, what does this look like if we go out with other people? You know what I mean? Like, I was like, is it just when we're together or when it go out with other people and blah, blah. And like, how would his romantic partners feel about that? Right. And so we had conversations like that. And once we had those conversations, I was like, you're not going to come back one day and throw this in my face. He was like, no. And if I do, like, cuss me the fuck out. Like, but like we had that conversation and from there it was like easy. And like one of the things that I also believe in and that like I've talked about with a lot of my like most intimate circles is I do believe in micro reparations. One of the reasons why he wanted to do it wasn't for like repayment, but we've known each other for a long time and he was like, you've invested in so much in my emotional growth. Like he was like, I think it's wowed that with this power dynamic and the labor that you've done that I would even consider it anything to show up in this way.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's also a conscious naming of even if labor isn't compensated, like even if you don't earn money from this, emotional support, he's still valuing it as a contribution to the relationship, right? Yeah. I think a lot of times, especially people who are higher earners financially, like don't always connect those dots. Yeah.
do you feel like there is a difference in how relationship anarchy is perceived in New Orleans versus by comparison to like any of the other places you've lived?
So I think in general, like a lot of people just don't know about relationship anarchy. Like unless you're in specific spaces, people just don't know what it is. So you're always going to be on this like place of explaining to people. I think in New Orleans, I'm just consider like people know I'm not from New Orleans. They look at me and they're like, "She not from here," right? The way I dress, the way I look, the gauge septum. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
those are all things that people go, you know. But I think one, I don't really date in New Orleans. New Orleans is like not a great place to date, no matter who you are. It's just not a great place to date. And part of it is like people get married young. A lot of people are already in committed relationships, have kids, all of that. You know what I mean? Like by the time they're in their early 30s. So it's not the best place to be single and to try to, in your like 30s, try to date regardless of what you're trying to do, even if you're looking for something more traditional. In terms of like exploring relationship anarchy here, child, don't nobody need that type of stress in their life. You know what I'm saying? Don't nobody need that type of stress in their life. Yeah, nah.
So you just
Mm-mm.
don't even bring it up.
Yeah.
You're just like, I'm not even gonna talk about this with my neighbors. I don't say shit about
I
non-monogamy.
talk about it with my friends here for sure, but outside of that, I mean, I had a man hitting on me last night. I was at this event afterwards. We all went for a drink, and he was like, when I said like, "Oh, I don't want to be married," somebody was like, "Oh, yeah, you just heard that people need to wife up," and I was like, "Oh, please, never, don't threaten me."
Nope. Right. Yeah. The
I didn't
threat.
come here for violence right now.
Right. Please don't threaten me. And he was like, "Wait, what?" And I was like, "Yeah, I have never want to be married." He was like, "Okay." Those concepts were already so like wowed for him. Like he was already like that was already a lot. So like for me to have tried to like this man trying to engage me saying he like thinks I'm cool, want to date me, and me to be like, "Oh, and also I pressure relationship anarchy," like he probably would have been like,
Just dissociate. Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So it's just like for the most part, and I'm not saying that there's nobody here that like I could possibly, I'm sure there are, but for the most part, it's just not the place.
If you're not interested or looking to really date locally, how do you primarily try dating? Like, do you do like online dating? Do you date when you travel? Like, how do you meet people?
Online dating, oh God, talk about hell. I like the old fashioned way. You remember when friends used to introduce you to people? Oh, let me see your picture. Isn't you think he cute? I think y'all would get along. Y'all should go on a date. That's the way I like, right? I've told people I'm like, I'm interested in dating. I'm interested in if you meet anybody, let me know. That's one way. I've met a lot of people in the airport.
Oh.
I have strangely met so like sitting at an airport bar. Go to a good bar in the airport, y'all. Having a drink, get in a conversation, exchange info. Oh, okay. I dated a person for a little minute. That's how we met. We met in the airport and then we like dated. We ended up dating for a while. So yeah, I mean, you can pick up anybody anywhere if you're not afraid to talk to people. And do I always want to talk to people? No. Like sometimes I want to go and I want to be to myself and I bring my book or whatever and everything like that. But like the art of being able to like go, mingle, talk, make friends with people around the bar, open up so many opportunities.
Really quick, going back to this idea of kind of tapping your community to form new connections, right? We've definitely talked about the idea of engaging in community in the past on the show, and whenever we do, we'll often get questions, how to become a part of community, how to build community. And for a lot of the time, we'll hear suggestions like, go talk to your neighbor, right? I think we've even said the same thing. And I don't know that is landing for people. Like, I feel like
No, because they think that they keep trying to translate it and we mean literally go talk to your damn neighbor.
Yeah.
Like the number of times I teach a workshop and I say, how many people know everybody on their block? And only 3 people raise their hands and I say, you want me to believe you can do community and you don't even know everybody on your damn block? First of all, let me just say, as a Black person, that's just not safe. Let's just talk on a basis of safety, right? But I think the question that I ask in workshops, why don't you know your neighbor's name? And don't lie to me and tell me it's because you haven't had the opportunity.
Mm.
It's that you haven't made the opportunity. And then I have another question. Why do you lack the curiosity about your neighbors? And I think this goes back to the conversation about community is inconvenient. And so I think for people wondering, but I do really want community. Community takes risk. I talked about this in the caption of my post yesterday. I said one of the reasons that I think people are they say they want intimacy, but everything that they do leans towards ease, right? And that's because ease requires very little risk. Ease is approachable. Ease allows you to predict. Inconvenience doesn't do that. Things pop up in life. They derail you. There's thing, and that requires labor, but it also requires risk. You have to risk possibly getting your feelings hurt. You have to risk being in situations that are uncomfortable. You have to risk awkwardness. You have to risk not knowing. You have to risk conflict. To knock on the door and say, hey, you're being kind of loud. Do you mind turning it down? Also, my name is, and I live.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I tell people all the time, if you would call the police rather than knock on your neighbor's door because of a noise complaint, you aren't safe.
Mm.
You called the cops because you simply couldn't be bothered? And I think, is it that you've never had opportunities for community, or is it that you've marked yourself unsafe for community?
Mm.
There is a cultural and communication style to community. I do need to say that to people. And so if you ever are trying to engage people and you keep hitting a wall, I want to be clear to you that sometimes that's because of your the way you are showing up culturally and communication wise are not in alignment with the community. The greatest example I can give is when I moved to New Orleans years ago, I had to really check myself. Not only does it have a very specific culture, native New Orleans have a very specific trauma that is theirs, right? And, when I got here, I had to learn that my pacing was very disruptive to people being able to trust me. I moved too fast. Everything I did was too fast. And not only did everything I was doing it fast, there was an assumption because of I was young, I was very accoladed already when I got here. The position I was in this industry, there were at the time very few Black people, let alone a Black woman. People also had concerns about that. And so there was this distrust. And at first, I had this kind of like, "Ugh, really, Black people were going to do this? You're going to side eye me?" But then I had to get called in, and this is what community's for, right? And who told you you are entitled to trust,
Mm-hmm.
right? It is my job to reassure them through my actions about why they don't need to be apprehensive about me. And through time, I learned that. But part of that was I had to shift so that they could better understand me. So yeah, I think those are things I think about. I wrote a post about how to build community. It's on my page. It's pinned. Go look at it. It's at the Collectress. And I think one of the things that people need to really switch and click in their mind is that I keep hearing people say, I want to find community. You can't find community. You build community. And one of the reasons why you can't find it is because you keep acting as if it's something you go to the store and you're letting your capitalistic internalization treat it as a consumer product rather than something you have to build. You have to be a community member in order to have community. You can't find something you don't participate in. There's people in my community I can't stand. I ain't gonna say no names, but there's one that lived 3 doors down. I can't stand her. But she is a part of my community.
Well, I happen to know she does listen to the podcast, so you're fucked now.
And you know what? And if I see her package on her doorstep, I pick it up for her. If I see something look strange around her house, I text her. Right? And there's an old white man that literally look round the corner down the street with a Trump sign. He be making his faces, and I look him in the eye every damn morning, and I say, "Good morning," while I walk my dog. Do I get on his nerves? I'm sure I do. And if he don't like it, his ass can move. But yeah, I think like obviously if it's unsafe, like let's use some discernment, folks. And also like even if this is someone you don't want to be a community member, you let them know that your body deserves to take up space. And that is in itself a radical act. I just want to say as one last piece, and I'll bring it back to it. I think that this community piece has me thinking about divorce. I know you're like, why community and divorce? Because I think like even within people who are committed to monogamy, I think one of the reasons why divorce is so prevalent is because people don't have community. They have marriage, they don't have community.
Yeah, the isolation of the nuclear family is very normalized. Yeah.
I don't know if y'all saw this on TikTok, but like last year on TikTok, it started with a black person being like, white people, what's one question you always wanted to ask black people? You know what I mean? Like, we gonna let y'all ask y'all one question. And then it flipped to like, black people, what's the question you always wanted to ask white people? And this black person was like, y'all got cousins? Because black people were like, you right, because I ain't never met a white person's cousin. And it started this whole chain of white people being like, I have cousins, but like, I don't really talk to them. And it was this very cultural different. And I think it was funny because Mexicans in their chat, they was like, yeah, we got cousins. And then they was like showing their like whole families, But I think like when specifically people are like, oh, like, do you have community? And like, is your nuclear family isolated? And if so, why? Right? I think like that's where people can start, right?
Ashtin, thank you so much for joining us. I would love to invite you to plug anything that you're working on, any upcoming projects, anything that you want to share with the listeners.
Yeah, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram as @the_Collectress. That's really the only place. And I don't have anything coming up. I don't have anything coming up until like end of next year. So as of now, that's it.
Yeah, so stay tuned, everyone, at the Collectress.
and I'll do a personal plug of it. Everything that she writes is awesome. It is really incredibly, if it's not clear from this interview, this is incredibly thought-provoking stuff. And incredibly prolific, if I can just say. You are
prolific and dense. Yeah.
Yes, prolific and dense. Like, talk about like, that's why writer was the first thing. It's impressive to me. It's very impressive.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. That warms my heart.
Aw.
Well, it feeds all of us. So, but in addition to that, if you are looking for more polyamory or non-monogamy content, Genevieve, as always, is on TikTok and Instagram @ChillPolyamory. She's also on YouTube @ChillPolyamory, where she discusses non-monogamy in film and TV.
So you can support those projects and this podcast directly on Patreon, where you'll get early access to videos, private stories, live question and answers, and one-on-one peer support options. So that's patreon.com/showpolyamory.
And for our listeners, remember that just because you've never done something before doesn't mean that you can't do it. Bye!
Bye!